The afternoon sun, warm and thick like spilled honey, dripped over the tree-lined streets of Memphis. Elvis Presley, behind the wheel of his gleaming Cadillac, hummed along to the rhythm of the city. He wasn't listening to music right then, just the quiet thrum of the engine and the gentle breeze whispering through his open window. He had a few hours free, a rare gift these days, and he was just driving, letting his mind wander. He'd been thinking about his last recording session, a tricky ballad that just hadn't quite clicked. Sometimes just driving, seeing the everyday world, helped clear his head. It grounded him, reminded him of where he came from, even as his life had turned into something grand and unbelievable. He rounded a corner onto a quieter residential street, the kind with neat lawns and porch swings. A glint of something caught his eye, something out of place. He slowed down, squinting. Up ahead, near an old weathered picket fence, a man was standing. And something was wrong. The man was tall, burly, with a scowl etched onto his face. He was holding something. No, not holding, but kicking. A small brown blur. Elvis's blood ran cold. A little hound mixed whimpering, trying to scramble away, but the man's foot connected again. A sickening thud. The dog cried out a sound that tore right through Elvis. It wasn't a bark of aggression, just pure, raw pain and fear. Elvis's foot slammed on the brake, the Cadillac squealing to a halt a good 50 yards away. His heart started pounding, a heavy drum in his chest. Everything else faded, the music, the touring, the fame. All that mattered was that poor creature. He saw the dog stumble, try to right itself. Its tail tucked so far between its legs, it seemed to disappear. The man raised his foot again, muttering something harsh and low. A surge of anger, hot and immediate, washed over Elvis. He wasn't just Elvis Presley the singer. In that moment, he was just a man, seeing something profoundly wrong, something that went against everything he believed in. He thought of his own dogs back at Graceland, the pure joy they brought him. He couldn't stand by, not for a second. He yanked the parking brake, the click echoing loud in the sudden silence of the car. His hand went to the door handle, his jaw tightening. He didn't think about who he was, or the headlines this might cause. He just knew he had to do something. Stepping out of the car, Elvis felt the warm Memphis air hit him, but he barely noticed. His gaze was fixed on the scene ahead, the man still towering over the trembling dog. The dog, a picture of misery. He started walking. His boots crunched on the gravel shoulder, each step deliberate. He could feel the anger simmering, but beneath it, a desperate need to help. He wasn't sure what he would say or what he would do, but he knew he couldn't let this continue. The man hadn't noticed him yet. His back mostly turned, the dog whimpered again, a tiny heart-wrenching sound. It tried to crawl under a bush, but it was too slow, too hurt. The man laughed, a cruel, short bark of a sound, and raised his foot one more time. "Hey!" Elvis's voice, usually so smooth and melodic, came out sharp, laced with an edge of steel. It cut through the afternoon stillness, making the man freeze, his foot suspended in mid-air. The man slowly turned, his face still contorted with irritation. His eyes, small and dark, landed on Elvis. For a moment, there was a flicker of confusion and recognition. His jaw dropped slightly. Elvis didn't wait, kept walking, closing the distance. His eyes never leaving the man, but his heart aching for the little dog cowering on the ground. This wasn't just about stopping an act of cruelty. This was about standing up for the helpless. This was about right and wrong, and Elvis Presley was about to make sure justice in some form was served on this quiet Memphis street. The man's eyes widened a fraction. He recognized Elvis. It was clear in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his jaw went slack. The initial scowl on his face shifted to something like disbelief, then a flicker of defensiveness. He quickly dropped his foot, almost casually, as if he hadn't been about to kick the dog again. Elvis stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the fear in the dog's eyes and the shame quickly masked by defiance in the man's. The little hound mix was pressed flat against the dusty ground, trembling, its eyes fixed on Elvis, wary but also somehow hopeful. "What do you think you're doing?" Elvis's voice was low, but it carried an undeniable weight. It wasn't the voice he used on stage, full of charm and swagger. This was something else, quiet but firm. A voice that demanded attention and respect. The man who Elvis now saw was wearing greasy overalls and had a week's worth of stubble on his chin straightened up. He tried to puff out his chest, but the effect was ruined by the slight tremor in his hands. "Way, what's it to you?" he stammered, trying to sound tough. "It's my dog. I can do what I want." Elvis's eyes narrowed. "No, you can't," he said, his voice dropping another notch, becoming almost a growl. "Not when what you're doing is hurting a helpless animal." He gestured to the dog with a slight nod of his head. "That dog is terrified, and it's clear you're the one making it that way." The man shifted his weight, glancing around. The street was still mostly empty, but a curtain twitched in a nearby house. He was starting to feel exposed. "Look, Mr. Presley," he said, his tone turning a little more conciliatory. "I didn't mean nothing. He chewed up my prized petunias. He's a worthless mutt." "Worthless?" Elvis scoffed. "There's no such thing as a worthless animal. Only a cruel owner." Took another step closer, his height and presence suddenly filling the small space between them. "You kick a dog for chewing a flower? That's not how you handle an animal. That's just plain meanness." The man's face reddened. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the intense gaze from Elvis, combined with the growing awareness that Elvis Presley was standing right in front of him, calling him out, seemed to choke the words in his throat. Probably expected to be met with fans, not a righteous fury. "Now I'm going to tell you this once," Elvis continued, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel that was impossible to ignore. "You are not going to lay another hand on that dog, not ever again." The man swallowed hard. "And who's going to stop me?" he mumbled, trying one last feeble attempt at defiance. Elvis just looked at him, a long, steady look that spoke volumes. He didn't need to say anything more. His reputation, his fame, his sheer presence did the talking. The man knew exactly who he was talking to, and he knew that word of this wouldn't stay quiet if Elvis chose otherwise. And the way Elvis was looking at him, he had no doubt Elvis would choose otherwise. The dog, meanwhile, had slowly lifted its head, its eyes fixed on Elvis. It seemed to sense the shift in the air, the powerful protector who had arrived. A tiny flicker of its tail, so slight it was barely perceptible, gave Elvis a fresh surge of determination. "This dog needs help," Elvis said, his gaze softening slightly as he looked at the trembling animal. "It needs a kind hand, not a cruel foot." He turned his attention back to the man. "You're not fit to own an animal, not one that you treat like this." The man fidgeted. Clearly wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by someone like Elvis. The power dynamic had completely flipped. He was the one who was cornered now. "So, what do you want from me?" The man grumbled, looking away, defeated. Elvis took a deep breath. This was the moment he had to be clear, firm, and offer a solution. "I want you to give me that dog," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "Right now." The man's head snapped back up, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected that. He probably thought Elvis would just lecture him and leave. But Elvis wasn't leaving, not without the dog. The man stared at Elvis, his mouth agape. "Give you the dog?" he repeated, disbelief lacing his voice. "Why would I do that?" "Because you're not taking care of it," Elvis stated, his voice unyielding. "You're hurting it, and I'm not going to stand here and watch that happen. That dog deserves a home where it's loved, not beaten." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Elvis and the cowering dog. "But he's mine," he mumbled, trying to cling to some shred of control. "Ownership doesn't give you the right to abuse," Elvis countered, his tone hardening. "You call him a worthless mutt. You kick him, you starve him, probably. Look at him. He's skin and bones." Elvis was right. Now that he was closer, he could see the dog's ribs clearly beneath its matted fur. This isn't about property. It's about a living creature's well-being. A curtain in the house across the street twitched again. Someone was definitely watching. The man noticed it too, and shifted uncomfortably. The last thing he needed was his neighbors getting involved, especially with Elvis Presley causing a scene. "Look, Mr. Presley, the man began, trying to find an excuse. "No justs." Elvis cut him off, his voice flat. "Either you hand him over, or we're going to have a much bigger problem here." He didn't raise his voice, but the implied threat was clear. He wasn't afraid to call the authorities or to make sure this became very public. The man, seeing the determined set of Elvis's jaw, seemed to understand he was trapped. On one side, a terrified dog he clearly didn't care for. On the other, one of the most famous men in the world, radiating an intense protective fury. The man's eyes narrowed in thought. He probably weighed his options. Fight Elvis, risk a public scandal, maybe even face charges for animal cruelty if Elvis pushed it, or simply get rid of the worthless mutt and avoid all the fuss. The dog was a burden to him anyway. All right, the man grumbled, throwing his hands up in a gesture of defeat. "Fine, take the damn thing. He's nothing but trouble anyway." Kicked a loose pebble with his shoe, looking anywhere but at Elvis. A small sigh of relief escaped Elvis's lips, though he kept his expression firm. He wasn't going to let the man off easy. Not yet. "And what about your other animals?" he asked, a sharp edge to his voice. "Do you treat them like this too?" The man flinched. No, just him," he said quickly, perhaps sensing that Elvis was testing him and not wanting to dig a deeper hole. He's a bad dog." Elvis didn't believe him for a second, but for now his priority was the dog cowering at their feet. "Good," he said, his tone warning rather than accepting. "'Cause if I ever hear of you mistreating another animal, I'll be back. And it won't be just me." He knelt slowly, carefully, a few feet from the dog. The little hound mix flinched its body, tensing, expecting another kick. Elvis moved slowly, extending a hand palm up towards the dog. "Hey there, little fella," he murmured, his voice softening. "It's okay now. You're safe." The dog watched his hand, its eyes wide and hesitant. Took a long moment, but then very slowly it stretched its nose out, sniffing Elvis's fingers. Its tail gave another tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. It was a sign of incredible bravery after what it had been through. Elvis smiled gently. "That's it, boy. Good fella." He stroked the dog's head very lightly. The fur was coarse and matted, but the dog didn't pull away. In fact, it leaned into the touch, ever so slightly. "So, you just taking him then?" the man asked, interrupting the moment he sounded eager to be rid of the dog. Elvis stood up, holding the dog gently by its scruff, careful not to hurt it, and scooped it into his arms. It was surprisingly light, confirming his suspicion that it was underweight. The dog trembled but didn't struggle, pressing itself into Elvis's chest. "Yes," Elvis said, holding the dog close. He looked the man dead in the eye. "I am." He turned. The dog nestled against him, its head peeking over his shoulder, looking back at the man with a strange mix of fear and what looked like triumph. Elvis walked back towards his Cadillac, the little dog, a warm, fragile weight in his arms. Could feel its heart pounding against his ribs, a frantic little drum. He had no idea what he was going to do with this dog, but one thing was for sure. Its life had just changed forever. And maybe, just maybe, his had too. With the small, trembling dog tucked safely in his arms, Elvis walked back to his Cadillac. The man stood rooted to the spot, watching him go, a mix of anger and relief on his face. He'd probably expected more of a fuss, maybe even a demand for money. But Elvis had just taken the dog, an act of sheer will and compassion. Reaching his car, Elvis carefully opened the passenger door. The dog whimpered softly, its eyes wide, taking in the plush leather interior. It clearly wasn't used to such luxury. Elvis gently placed it on the seat, then quickly leaned in to ensure it wouldn't fall. "It's okay, little fella," he murmured, his voice soft and reassuring. He ran a hand over its matted fur, feeling the bony frame underneath. There were several small cuts and scrapes visible through the dirt. "We're gonna get you fixed up." Closed the door and walked around to the driver's side, glancing back at the man's house. The man had disappeared inside. Good Elvis didn't want any more confrontation. He just wanted to get this poor creature somewhere safe. It had curled up on the seat, still trembling, but its eyes were fixed on him. It was a scruffy, nondescript little dog, a mix of maybe beagle and some kind of terrier, with floppy ears and sad brown eyes. But in Elvis's eyes, it was beautiful. It was a survivor. "All right, boy," Elvis said, starting the engine. The dog flinched at the sound, but then seemed to settle when the car began to move smoothly. "First stop, we're going to find a vet. Get you checked out." He drove slowly, carefully keeping an eye on the dog. It seemed to relax a little with each passing minute, its breathing becoming less ragged. It still wasn't making a sound, just watching him, its little body a picture of quiet apprehension. Elvis thought about what had just happened. He, Elvis Presley, had stopped his car, confronted a stranger, and taken his dog. It was impulsive, yes, but it felt so right. Couldn't have lived with himself if he'd just driven past. This was more important than any concert, any movie, any hit record. This was about doing what was right, pure and simple. Pulled out his handkerchief from his pocket, a clean white one, and gently dabbed at a small cut near the dog's eye. The dog whined softly but didn't pull away. It seemed to understand that this was a kind touch, not a cruel one. "You're going to be all right," Elvis promised, his voice full of genuine affection. "We'll get you some good food, a warm bed. You won't have to worry about mean people anymore." He began to think about where the nearest veterinary clinic was. He usually had his manager, Colonel Parker, handle these kinds of practical matters, but this was different. This was personal. He was going to handle this himself. He spotted a sign for an animal hospital a few blocks ahead. "Perfect," he signaled, turned into the parking lot, and pulled into a vacant spot. The dog's ears perked up, sensing the stop. "All right, here we go," Elvis said, giving the dog a reassuring pat. He got out of the car, the dog watching him intently through the window. He opened the passenger door, and the dog hesitantly looked at him, then seemed to realize he wasn't going to hurt it. "Come on, fella," Elvis coaxed, holding out his hand. The dog, still a little wobbly, slowly got out, its tail still tucked, but not as rigidly as before. It stood beside Elvis, leaning slightly into his leg. A silent plea for protection. Elvis gently wrapped an arm around the dog's thin body, guiding it towards the entrance of the clinic. He knew he was about to cause a stir. Elvis Presley, walking into an animal hospital with a scruffy, injured dog, was not an everyday occurrence. But he didn't care. This dog needed him, and Elvis Presley, for all his fame, was just a man trying to do some good in the world. And right now, this little dog was the most important thing. Walking into the animal hospital with a visibly scruffy and injured dog clinging to his leg was, as Elvis expected, an immediate attention grabber. The receptionist, a young woman with a neatly pinned blonde beehive, gasped when she saw him. Her eyes widened, first in surprise at seeing Elvis Presley, then with concern for the small dog by his side. "Mr. Presley?" she exclaimed, her voice a little breathless. Is everything all right? Is that your dog?" Elvis offered a tired but polite smile. "Afternoon, ma'am." "No, he's not mine. Not yet. Anyway, I found him. He needs help. Looks like he's been through a rough time." He gestured to the dog, who was now shivering slightly, probably from a combination of fear and shock. "Oh my goodness," the receptionist said, her professional demeanor kicking in. "Of course, we'll get him seen right away. What's his name?" Elvis paused. He hadn't thought of a name yet. He doesn't have one. He needs a doctor as soon as possible. "Right this way," she said quickly, ushering him towards an examination room. "Dr. Henderson will be with you in just a moment." Elvis gently guided the dog into the room. It was clean and smelled faintly of antiseptic. He sat down on a small bench, and the dog, after a hesitant moment, climbed onto his lap. It curled into a tight ball, its head tucked under Elvis's arm, seeking comfort. Elvis stroked its head gently, feeling the warmth of its small body against his. The wait wasn't long. Kindly-looking man, in a white coat. Dr. Henderson walked in, his eyes widening slightly when he saw Elvis, but he quickly composed himself. His focus shifted immediately, the doctor said warmly. "And what have we here?" He approached slowly, speaking in a calm, soothing voice. "Afternoon, doctor," Elvis replied. "I found him being mistreated. He's pretty scared and he's got some cuts. And he's awful thin." Dr. Henderson nodded, his expression grim. Carefully reached out and began to examine the dog, speaking gently to it the whole time. The dog flinched at first, but with Elvis's comforting hand on its back, it allowed the examination. "Yes, I see," the doctor murmured, his brow furrowed, as he checked the dog's eyes, ears, and teeth. "He's certainly underweight, and these scrapes consistent with impact." He gently probed the dog's ribs. "No broken bones, thankfully, but definitely a lot of bruising and muscle soreness, and a few older scars here and there. Looks like..." He checked the dog's paws, noting the worn pads indicating a lot of walking, or standing on rough surfaces. "He'll need some pain medication, antibiotics for these cuts, and a good deworming," Dr. Henderson explained. "And a lot of good nutritious food and patience. A lot of patience. He's very skittish." "He'll get all of that," Elvis said, his voice firm. "Whatever he needs, I'll make sure of it." The doctor looked up at Elvis, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "That's wonderful, Mr. Presley. He's a lucky dog to have crossed your path." Elvis just nodded, focusing on the dog. He continued to stroke its fur, the rhythmic motion seeming to calm the little animal. The doctor took a blood sample, which the dog barely noticed, so absorbed was it in Elvis's touch. "We'll get him cleaned up for you, too," Dr. Henderson offered. "Give him a bath. Get some of that matted fur out. He'll feel a lot better." "Thank you, doctor," Elvis said, feeling a wave of relief. He knew he was doing the right thing. He imagined the little dog clean and fed, playful and happy. It was a powerful image as the vet tech came to take the dog for its bath and initial treatments. Elvis reluctantly handed him over. The dog whined a low, mournful sound, looking at Elvis with pleading eyes. Elvis bent down and gently patted its head. "I'll be right here, boy," he promised. "You just hold on. I'm not going anywhere." Watching the small dog disappear down the hallway, Elvis felt a strange mix of emotions. A profound sense of accomplishment, a lingering anger at the cruelty he'd witnessed, and a deep, unexpected connection to this little creature. He knew then, without a doubt, that this dog was coming home with him to Graceland. While the dog was being treated, Elvis sat in the waiting room trying to be discreet, but it was impossible. Even just sitting there, wearing his signature sunglasses, he was recognized. Whispers followed him, and a few brave souls approached for an autograph, which he politely declined, explaining he was there for a medical emergency. Most people understood their curiosity about him, quickly shifting to concern for the unseen dog. Dr. Henderson returned after about 45 minutes, a small, kind smile on his face. "He's doing well, Mr. Presley," he reported. "We've cleaned his wounds, given him the antibiotics. He's had a bath. He's a different dog already, though still a bit nervous." Elvis felt a surge of warmth. "Can I see him?" he asked eagerly. "Of course," the doctor said, leading him to another room. There on a padded exit leading him to another room. His fur, though still a little damp, was no longer matted and dirty, revealing a rich reddish-brown color, with some white markings on his chest and paws. He still looked thin, but his eyes were brighter, less fearful. He spotted Elvis, and to Elvis's delight, his tail gave a tentative wag. Not a full confident wag yet, but a definite movement. "Well, hello there, handsome," Elvis murmured, approaching slowly. He reached out a hand, and this time the dog didn't flinch. It nudged its head into his palm, leaning into the touch. "He's very responsive to you," Dr. Henderson observed. "He seems to trust you already." "He just needed someone to be kind to him," Elvis said softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. The dog closed its eyes in apparent bliss. "He's a good boy, I can tell. The doctor explained. The follow-up care, daily medication, a specific diet to help him gain weight, and plenty of rest. He emphasized the importance of patience and gentle handling for a dog that had clearly suffered abuse. We also scanned him for a microchip, the doctor added. He doesn't have one, so there's no way to trace an owner. Not that you'd want to, given the circumstances. Elvis nodded. No, I wouldn't. He's coming home with me. I'm going to take care of him. Dr. Henderson smiled. He's going to have a wonderful life with you, Mr. Presley. He'll need some basic vaccinations, and we should neuter him once he's stronger. We can schedule those appointments for you. Elvis agreed to everything, pulling out his wallet to pay for the visit. He insisted on covering all costs, despite the clinic offering a discount once they realized the circumstances. No, doctor, you've done a wonderful job. This is important. As the paperwork was completed and the medications were bagged, Elvis carefully picked up the dog. This time the dog didn't tremble as much. It nuzzled its head into the crook of his neck, a soft, contented sigh escaping its small body. "All right, fella," Elvis whispered, carrying him out of the clinic, past the still whispering and star-struck staff. Time to go home. The drive back to Graceland was different. The dog, now clean and feeling a little better, seemed more relaxed. It occasionally lifted its head to look out the window, its ears twitching at the passing sights and sounds. Elvis kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently stroking the dog's fur. He felt a deep sense of contentment. It wasn't the kind of thrill he got from a roaring crowd or the satisfaction of a perfect vocal take. This was a quieter, more profound feeling. It was the joy of helping, of making a direct difference in a fragile life. As he pulled up the long driveway to Graceland, the stately white columns of his home seemed to welcome them both. He knew his family, and the guys from the Memphis Mafia would be surprised to see him arrive with a new scruffy companion, but he also knew they'd understand. This was a good thing. This was a right thing. And for Elvis, that was all that mattered. The gates of Graceland swung open, revealing the familiar grandeur of his home. As Elvis drove the Cadillac up the long winding driveway, the little dog in his arms lifted its head, its eyes wide with curiosity. It was a far cry from the dusty street and the cruelty it had known just hours before. Elvis pulled up to the front door, where his cousin Gene and his trusted friend Red West were already waiting on the porch. They looked surprised to see him arriving alone. Usually he was with a whole entourage. Their surprise turned to open-mouthed astonishment when they saw the dog cradled in his arms. "Elvis, what in the world?" Jen started, his brow furrowed. "Who's your friend?" Red asked, a grin slowly spreading across his face as he took in the scruffy but now clean hound mix. Elvis smiled, a genuine warm smile. "This, fellas, is our newest family member." He explained quickly, concisely, how he'd found the dog, the confrontation, and the vet. As he spoke, the usual banter and joking faded from Gene and Red's faces, replaced by understanding and a quiet respect. "Some fellow is kicking him, Jen," Elvis finished, his voice still holding a hint of the anger he'd felt. "Couldn't just drive by." "No, you couldn't," Red agreed, his expression serious. "That's a rotten thing to do, poor little guy. He's underweight and got some bruises, but the vet says he'll be fine with some care," Elvis said, carefully setting the dog down on the cool marble of the entrance hall. Dog looked around, sniffed tentatively, its tail giving a small, hesitant wag. "Well, come on in then," Jen said, opening the door wider. "Let's get him settled." Inside, Graceland was quiet, as it often was in the afternoons before dinner. Elvis's father, Vernon, usually spent his days managing the farm or business matters, and his grandmother, Minnie May, might be knitting or watching TV. "We need to find him a spot," Elvis mused, looking around. He already had several dogs, mostly bigger breeds like his German Shepherd, Sable, or his Chow Chows. But this little fellow was different. He needed a quiet, safe space where he could recover and feel secure. "How about a corner of the sunroom for now?" Red suggested. "It's warm and bright, and he can see outside. Perfect," Elvis agreed. He led the way, the little dog following, cautiously sniffing the unfamiliar scents of the grand house. The sunroom with its large windows and comfortable chairs seemed like a good temporary spot. They found a soft blanket and made a makeshift bed in a quiet corner. Elvis then went to the kitchen and got a bowl of water and some of the specialized food the vet had recommended. The dog watched him with cautious eyes, but when Elvis placed the bowls down, its hunger finally overcame its fear. It ate and drank with a quiet intensity that showed just how starved it had been. Later that afternoon, Elvis sat on the floor beside the dog, gently stroking its head. He watched as the dog, now full and warm, finally curled up on the blanket and drifted off to sleep, a soft sigh escaping its tiny body. It was the deepest, most peaceful sleep Elvis had seen it in. He reflected on the day. Just hours ago, he was driving, aimlessly, a little restless, a little bored now. He felt a profound sense of purpose. This little dog, rescued from cruelty, was now safe, warm, and loved. And Elvis, the superstar, felt more like a simple man who had done a good deed. He thought about a name. Something strong, something that represented a new beginning. He looked at the dog now peacefully sleeping, its little paws twitching, as if dreaming of chasing rabbits. It was a Memphis dog, through and through. Found on a Memphis street, brought to a Memphis. He whispered, testing the name. "How about that, boy? Memphis." The dog didn't stir, but Elvis felt a certainty in his heart. Memphis had fit. This little dog, a symbol of resilience and hope, had found his forever home. And in doing so, he had brought a quiet, unexpected joy into the heart of a king. The days that followed were a testament to the power of kindness and patience. Memphis, as Elvis now officially called him, slowly but surely began to heal. Physically, the bruises faded, the cuts scabbed over, and with the special food he started to gain weight. His ribs became less prominent and his fur grew softer, shinier, but it was the emotional healing that was the most heartwarming to witness. At first, Memphis was still wary. Loud noises would make him flinch. Sudden movements would send him scurrying under a chair he'd hide when new people came into the sunroom. Elvis spent as much time with him as his schedule allowed. He'd sit on the floor, talking softly to Memphis, stroking his fur, letting the dog know he was safe. He'd sing quiet songs, not his roaring rock and roll tunes, but gentle gospel hymns or country ballads. Memphis would often lay his head on Elvis's lap, listening, his eyes half closed in contentment. It was during these quiet moments that the bond truly formed. Memphis learned that Elvis's hand was always for petting, never for striking. He learned that food came regularly, without having to beg or fight for it. He learned that soft voices meant comfort, not anger. One afternoon, a week after Memphis arrived, Elvis was sitting in the sunroom, reading a script for an upcoming movie. Memphis was curled up on his blanket a few feet away. Suddenly, Elvis sneezed loudly. Memphis instinctively flinched and started to scramble away, but then he stopped. He looked back at Elvis, who was just reaching for a tissue, and seemed to realize there was no threat. Instead of running, he slowly, tentatively padded over and nudged Elvis's hand with his wet nose. Elvis looked down, surprised and touched. He reached out and scratched Memphis behind the ears. "It's all right, boy," he murmured. Started to follow Elvis around Graceland, a small, quiet shadow. If Elvis was in the living room, Memphis would be curled up on the rug nearby. If Elvis went to the kitchen for a snack, Memphis would be at his heels, his tail giving small, happy thumps. He even started to play. Elvis bought him a few simple toys, a rubber ball, a roped shoe. At first, Memphis didn't know what to do with him, but watching Elvis bounce the ball, Memphis would tentatively bat at it, then chase it, a playful glint in his eyes. His barks, which had once been whimpers of fear, became excited yips of joy during playtime. Elvis's family and friends at Graceland also embraced Memphis. Vernon, initially reserved, found himself tossing the ball. For the little dog, Minnie May would sneak him extra treats under the table. The Memphis Mafia members, rough and tough as they were, couldn't resist the little dog's charm and his obvious devotion to Elvis. They saw the quiet joy Memphis brought to Elvis, who, despite his fame, often carried a heavy weight of responsibility and pressure. Memphis became a source of calm and unconditional affection for Elvis. When the pressures of his career felt overwhelming, when the noise of the world outside Graceland became too much, Elvis would retreat to the quiet companionship of Memphis. Petting the soft fur, feeling the warmth of the dog's body beside him, was a simple, grounding pleasure. News of Elvis's rescue of a stray dog did eventually leak, as most things involving Elvis did. It was mentioned in local papers and then picked up by national tabloids. But unlike some of the more sensational stories, this one was universally positive. It painted Elvis not just as a rock and roll star, but as a compassionate, down-to-earth man who cared about the voiceless Elvis, though wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about Memphis, sleeping peacefully on his lap. A small, content wait, a testament to a life saved, and a bond formed. Memphis thrived at Graceland. He was no longer the cowering, fearful creature Elvis had rescued. He was a playful, affectionate, and fiercely loyal dog. His once thin body filled out, his fur became sleek and glossy, and his eyes sparkled with life and intelligence. His presence subtly changed the atmosphere at Graceland. The usual hustle and bustle of managers, musicians, and friends, while still present, was often punctuated by the happy thud of Memphis's tail hitting the floor or the soft jingle of his collar. As he trotted by, he became a calming influence, a reminder of simple joys. The pressures of being the biggest star in the world were immense. The demands of touring, recording, making movies, dealing with the constant scrutiny. It could be exhausting. But Memphis offered an escape. He didn't care about record sales or movie reviews. He just wanted a head scratch, a belly rub, or a walk around the grounds. Elvis would often take Memphis for long strolls through the Graceland estate, away from the watchful eyes of fans and the demanding calls of his career. He'd throw sticks for Memphis, watch him chase squirrels with enthusiastic barks, and simply enjoy the quiet companionship. During these walks, Elvis would sometimes talk to Memphis, sharing his thoughts and worries, knowing the dog wouldn't judge, only listen with unwavering attention. Memphis also proved to be surprisingly good with other people. While still a little wary of strangers at first, he learned to trust new faces, especially when they were introduced by Elvis. He became particularly fond of Vernon, who would often slip him bits of bacon from his breakfast plate, and Minnie May, who would knit him little scarves in the winter. Even the usually stoic Colonel Parker, on one of his visits, found himself smiling as Memphis nudged his hand for a pat. The story of Memphis's rescue gained more traction. Animal shelters and humane societies wrote letters to Elvis thanking him for raising awareness about animal cruelty. Some fans even started their own local rescue efforts inspired by his actions. Elvis, though somewhat uncomfortable with the public attention, was genuinely pleased that his impulse to help had sparked something positive in others. He quietly donated to several animal charities, often anonymously. One afternoon, a local journalist managed to get a brief interview with Elvis outside the gates of Graceland, catching him just as he was taking Memphis for a walk. The journalist asked about the dog. "He's the best thing that's happened to me in a while," Elvis said, his voice soft as he ruffled Memphis's ears. Memphis leaned into his hand, looking up at him with adoration. "He was in a bad spot and I couldn't leave him. He needed help and I was there." "Some say you saved his life, Mr. Presley," the journalist prompted. Elvis considered this, then smiled. "Maybe I did, but he saved mine, too. In a way, he reminds me of what's important. Simple things, loyalty, love, being kind to those who need it most." He looked down at Memphis, who was now sniffing intently at a patch of grass, completely oblivious to the cameras and the famous man holding his leash. This little dog, once forgotten and abused, was now a cherished member of the Presley household, a symbol of hope and kindness. Memphis brought a quiet happiness to Elvis, a sense of grounding that fame often stripped away. He was a loyal friend, a playful companion, and a constant reminder that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple out and change so much more than just one life. Months turned into a year. Memphis was no longer just the dog Elvis. He was simply Memphis, a beloved member of the Presley household. His transformation was complete. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by unwavering trust, his tentative movements by confident strides, and his quiet shyness by playful affection. He had his favorite spots: a sunbeam in the living room, a particular armchair in Elvis's study, and, of course, a warm corner of Elvis's bedroom at night. He had a deep rumbling bark that he used to announce visitors or chase squirrels up trees, a far cry from the whimpers Elvis had first heard. Elvis's life continued its dizzying pace of concerts, recording sessions and movie sets. But no matter how hectic things got, the quiet presence of Memphis was a constant source of calm. When Elvis returned from a long tour, Memphis would be the first to greet him, a whirlwind of happy bumbles and tail wags, his excitement bubbling over. That pure, unadulterated joy was a powerful antidote to exhaustion and pressure. The incident on the quiet Memphis street had become a local legend, a heartwarming story whispered among fans and neighbors. The man who had mistreated Memphis was never seen again in that neighborhood, and word was he'd moved away, perhaps chastened by his public confrontation with a superstar. Elvis never pursued it further. His goal had been to save the dog, not to punish the man beyond taking away his victim. Elvis often thought about that afternoon. It had been an impulsive act, driven by pure instinct and anger at injustice, but it had led to something profound. It wasn't about being Elvis Presley, the famous singer. It was about being a human being acting on compassion. One warm spring evening, Elvis sat on the porch at Graceland watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Memphis lay at his feet, his head resting on Elvis's shoe, occasionally sighing contentedly in his sleep. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the ancient oaks. Elvis reached down and gently stroked Memphis's head. The soft fur, the steady breathing, the peaceful presence. It was a simple, perfect moment. "You know, boy," Elvis murmured, his voice low, "you're one of the best decisions I ever made." Memphis shifted slightly, opening one eye, then closing it again as if in agreement. It wasn't just Memphis's life that had been saved that day. In a way, Elvis's soul had been nourished too. The act of kindness, the selfless rescue, had brought a quiet joy and a renewed sense of purpose that transcended the glitter and demands of his fame. He knew that even as his star continued to rise, these simple, genuine connections were what truly mattered. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn. Memphis snored softly, a happy, peaceful sound. Elvis leaned back, a contented smile on his face. This little dog, once abandoned and abused, was now a symbol of new beginnings, a testament to the power of one person's decision to stop and make a difference. And in the heart of the king, there was a quiet, heartwarming sense of peace, knowing that he had done something truly good.